My name is Julia Wedman, and I am the principal Baroque leader of Symphony Nova Scotia. Today, I am joined by Christopher Bagan, our harpsichord soloist for the upcoming concerts of Brandenburg Concertos. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course, happy to talk Bach.
Yeah, great. Now, Chris and I play together every year at the Toronto Bach Festival, and I would venture to say that maybe Bach's music is the music that you and I have played the most of any composer.
Absolutely. I think note for note, we've definitely covered more Bach than anything else. Right. Chamber music, orchestral, cantatas, you name it.
Yeah. So today we're talking about the Brandenburg Concertos, which I know you love as much as I do. And I know especially the fifth one has a very special place in your heart, as all of them do in mine. And can you tell me about when you first discovered them?
Oh my. I mean, I knew of the Brandenburg to listen to, as, everybody gets, exposed to the Brandenburg. And if you're a musician, you know the Brandenburg. But the fifth, this kind of harpsichord concerto thing that emerges it's a special thing, and it kind of got me into the harpsichord as a piece that just said, I need to learn that, because it's just so audacious. It's just so ridiculous how many notes he puts into this one piece.
Was it the first piece you ever played on harpsichord?
Not quite the first, but it was the first one that I was like, I have to learn that. And so I was practicing it in a practice room one day at University of British Columbia, and somebody walked by and I overheard them talking. It says, somebody was absolutely shredding on the harpsichord in there. And I thought, all right, this is what I want to do. This is the one.
If people are talking about me shredding, this is the piece for me. This is a composer for me. Yeah. Now, the Brandenburg Concertos were written, I think, in one of the most fascinating times in Bach's life. So he was living in this small town called Köthen in Germany. It's not so far from Leipzig. And I think this was his first kind of big job, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gainfully employed as a musician. It's
right?
a good thing.
This was because he'd been employed in Weimar. He was the concertmaster of the orchestra in Weimar, and he was working. But here in Köthen, he had this Prince Leopold, who loved music and who was a musician himself. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But he kind of, the world was his oyster here, right? He had, there are all sorts of stories of musicians coming in and playing with them. They had access to great musicians. He had support from the prince. He kind of got to do what he wanted finally, didn't he?
It seems too like that's a period in his life where he was writing music for music's sake. It wasn't necessarily with a higher purpose or a connection to something. It was just music for a joy of playing and listening to it, and that's kind of unique amongst his output too.
Yeah, and then on the other side of what happened in his time in Köthen was he was married. He had young children, and about 3 years into this tenure, as you know, Bach went on a vacation with the prince to Carlsbad, which was like a spa town, which I've always wanted. I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go to it. So they went to Carlsbad, and when he came back, he found out that his wife, Maria Barbara, died suddenly. So he didn't find out until he got home that suddenly his wife was not there. And I think this must have just completely changed things. I don't know. Have you ever been to Köthen?
I haven't been to Köthen. No,
okay,
that's
I'm going to have to take you there.
Yeah, please.
It's a very small town, and the palace there is kind of more like a hunting lodge than what you think of as a Disney castle or something. It's not like that. It's like more of a kind of small scale castle. It's like this beautiful little moat that runs around it, and the town is nearby. He lived a few blocks away. And it's this, it's quite a small insular place. So for something, when things are going well, I think it would be incredible. And suddenly something changes, like your wife dies. For me, it's a kind of place that would get kind of claustrophobic. And within about 4 or 5 months of his Maria Barbara dying, he was already applying for a different job in Hamburg. And things started like moving, I think, pretty quickly for him at this point. So the year Maria Barbara died was 1720, and he was applying for the summer of 1720. He was applying to go to Hamburg in November of 1720, and within a year, 1721, he already had found a new partner, Anna Magdalena Bach, and got married. And in this space of time, this 1721 period, right in between losing his first wife and marrying his second, that's when the Brandenburg concertos were I would say collected, because there's some evidence that they were written before.
Yeah, there's some earlier versions of, I think, at least one of the concertos for five for sure. There's an early version of five.
Yeah, and there's some early cantata versions from Weimar of some of the movements of Brandenburg 1, right? So it seems like Bach had been writing a lot of things, and here he made this beautiful collection in 1721 that was sent to the Margrave of Brandenburg, which again was almost like a little job interview. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about number 5. One of the things I think that you and I also love about these Brandenburgs is Bach's creative use of instrumentation. And you were saying, we were talking before about how different Bach's concertos are in the Brandenburg concertos to a composer like Vivaldi. And maybe can you talk a little bit more about that?
There's a pithy remark that people use, I think, about Vivaldi. They say he wrote one violin concerto 200 times. But, you know, there's a little truth to it. There's a formula, and there's a certain way of exposing the instrument, and how the orchestra starts, and then the soloist takes over in certain places, and it does follow a particular pattern. And I feel
Let me just say, we love Vivaldi.
We love Vivaldi, yes. But Bach we also love, because, you know, there's no mold for these pieces.
Yeah.
They're 6 completely different nuggets of just absolute unique pieces that hadn't existed prior. I don't think there's another matching piece for any of those ensembles even, really, which is kind of special, you know, to have this collection for that reason.
Yeah, so maybe let's talk through this unique instrumentation and orchestrations, and he really uses in each one, he uses the instruments in such different ways, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
It's like he was creating a new mold for a concerto in each concerto.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So the very first concerto uses a special instrument that wasn't often used in concertos.
Yeah, and I mean, I speak from a long past as a horn player. I used to play the French horn. Yeah. I played the French horn. This was a while ago, but I played the modern French horn, which is this very noble kind of instrument that, you know, you associate with these sort of elevated themes and characters. And but the horn that Bach was using for this first Brandenburg concerto was very much an outdoor dog. It was an instrument that was used for hunting, very much a communicative thing on the hunt to play these calls while you were on horseback hunting. And, you know, so it was an outdoor instrument, brash, designed to be played in this very non-elegant sort of way. And I think it's special, some of these recordings that have come out of Brandenburg 1, where Bach incorporates this outdoor instrument into the piece. And he sort of says, no, tone it down a little bit, but I like it when the horn is allowed to be a little bit outdoors.
I think we'll probably have some outdoor horns this week. Yeah, so the Brandenburg 1 features horns and oboes and bassoon and a very special kind of violin. And I'm gonna give you a little demonstration of my new little piccolo violin. All right, so I'm just going to introduce you to the 2 violins that I'll be using for the Brandenburg. So for most of the concert, I'll be playing on a violin that looks like this, a normal-sized violin. But for the first Brandenburg concerto, I'll be using my little piccolo violin, which is a little bit smaller than my normal violin, this one. And it's also tuned a little bit differently. So my regular violin strings sound like this. But the piccolo strings have this high note. And I'll just give you a little example of what it sounds like. So this is of the contrast between the two. So here's my normal violin. So that is what the music would sound like if I just played it on my normal violin. But Bach has written it to be played on a violin that's tuned differently. So the notes that when they come out, I'm reading the exact same thing, but the notes coming out on the piccolo sound like this. Nice and high and squeaky. You're gonna love it. Now, the second Brandenburg concerto features another kind of outdoor instrument.
Is that the trumpet?
Doesn't it? It's the trumpet,
yeah. All these brass instruments.
Who doesn't love trumpet?
I know.
Yeah, so the second Brandenburg features trumpet, oboe, recorder, and violin, and it's sort of, I think, kind of an unusual combination. I can't even think of any other piece that, especially something that to feature trumpet and recorder, because recorder tends to be like a soft and delicate instrument.
What's the word? It's flauto dolce. That's the sweet flute. You
Exactly.
know, it's got that kind of association for sure.
Yeah.
And trumpet, I mean, we think of it as a loud brass instrument, but the natural trumpet, I would say, is much softer too. The earlier trumpet kind of has a more muted tone, and you could balance those three instruments quite well within
so
that.
it's a very creative use of instrumentation there. Now, I heard that your favorite concerto is Brandenburg 3, other than 5, of course.
Well, 5, yes.
And why do you love Brandenburg 3? I love it too, but why do you love it?
Happy G major. It's galloping. It's lovely music. It's a little nerdy because it's the third concerto, and there's all these threes and associations with the number 3. And I don't know. I kind of like that side of Bach when you get into his fascination with numbers. And so it's a neat piece to see. You were saying this, seeing the setup is very kind of neat. You see all these threes.
Yeah, I think it's one of those special pieces. A lot of pieces are great on recordings, and you can get the effect of the piece on a recording, but Brandenburg 3 for me is one of the ones that you cannot get the
full effect.
The full effect.
Yeah.
You can't get the experience of the piece unless you see it in person. And I recommend getting a front row seat to Brandenburg 3, because you have these 3 violin parts, and then you've got the 3 viola parts, and you've got the 3 cello parts, and you kind of never know who's going to be playing what. And I've got a solo, and the first viola's got a solo, first cello's got a solo, second violin, second viola, third violin,
Permutations and combinations.
Yes, permutations and commutations. Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's a lot of fun to play, but I think it's a lot of fun as an audience member to just be like, oh, what's happening?
There's a real visual aspect to all of the Brandenburg too, especially maybe this one, but they are fun to watch.
Yeah, they are fun to watch. Now, there is an interesting feature also in Brandenburg 3, which is, if we're talking about threes, and this is interesting, why didn't he really write 3 movements?
Right.
The second movement is what?
Well, I mean, 3 movements seems obvious.
Right?
All concertos to this point are in basically 3 movements,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. So Bach didn't write a middle movement to this piece. He wrote 2 chords, 2 chords for the orchestra, just chord, and that's it. And so presumably that means someone is supposed to take over and kind of improvise or extemporize a movement as the slow movement. And so I know we've shared that duty on a variety of occasions when we played this piece. Either I sort of do a little cadenza, or you do one, you start one, and so it's just an opportunity to kind of create, I guess, that third movement on the spot, and let it be different each time, and let it be interesting, and just completely up to the performers to kind of.
And I wonder in that first performance of Brandenburg 3, if they did one at Köthen,
if Bach was playing,
right? It would have been
playing,
it would have been him
Yeah,
doing that
yeah.
improvisation,
Again,
don't you
to
think?
be a fly on the wall watching Bach improvise, just to have that many ideas at your fingertips and to be able to execute them flawlessly. Just, I can't imagine.
He was, it was really one of the things he was known for, isn't it? Like he was like the improviser. There are like stories of him just doing these like incredibly long, extensive improvisations.
Or just, I mean, even hearing a little theme and knowing instantaneously all of the possible things you could do with it. Like there's all these stories of him nudging his son and saying, oh, I could do that in augmentation, and I could do that by flipping it upside down and back to front. And what kind of mind is able to sort of hear that and know immediately all the possible potential of a theme? It's pretty kind of fascinating. You know?
Yeah. Now, the fourth Brandenburg Concerto has a big violin solo, one of my favorite ones to play, but it also has two wonderful recorder solos. And I don't know, I've got this like image of like myself playing, because you know I know my part very well, but then we have these like two recorders who often play at the same time.
They're kind of your background singers, right?
I think they have great, they have
so
awesome parts themselves, but it's really this kind of like dialogue between like me and the two, and then this bigger, larger dialogue with the orchestra. And I think in a way that's one of the most interesting things about all of these concertos, isn't it? This dialogue, the conversations that we're having. Yeah. And I think as a listener, my mom always says, "Oh, Julie, I don't like Bach's music. It's too busy.
Too busy.
It's too busy."
Well, there's some busyness in that concerto too. What happens to your part? Don't you get some of the little bit of busyness?
I do. I do. Yeah. And this is, and we'll see you do it in 5, but this is in 4. There's this kind of thing that Bach does, which really makes me think of what a virtuoso kind of musician he was as well, and how much he kind of understood the need for like showing off in a way, because you'll be playing some beautiful, joyful thing that just seems like wonderful and normal, and then all of a sudden a solo instrument will take off in something totally crazy. And so that happens for me in 4, and that happens for you in 5, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. But let's talk about the harpsichord that Bach used in 5, because this is a great story, and it also has a very special connection to your new harpsichord. So tell me about your new harpsichord.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, it mirrors a special thing. So I think probably the most exciting errand you can be sent on as a keyboardist is someone says, "Oh, I'd like you to go either pick out for me a brand new instrument." So you get to go meet either a factory or a maker of an instrument, try out all their instruments, and select one to come home with you or to be brought back for another. And in the case of Bach, he was sent to Berlin to the maker Michael Mietke, who was kind of making a name for himself as a harpsichord builder of the day, made these truly special instruments of the time that just really lent themselves to the language that Bach was writing in, of having multiple parts all in dialogue, and you could play that on these instruments of Mietke's and hear all those parts in relief. You can absolutely pick out all the parts. So
how is that different from like a harpsichord that was made in Italy or France, for example?
Well, I mean, there's all these national styles. Each sort of country had a sound they were after, and it paralleled the music that was written for it. In France, you have an instrument that has a really long sustain that is sort of emphasizing harmonic content, like the chords and just this lush sound. You wanted to hear those beautiful
French chords.
Absolutely. And then the Italian kind of contrasts that with sort of this very spontaneous, very almost noisy sound, like with real consonant to the beginning of the sound, and that is excellent as a accompanying instrument, or in the solo music, which is written kind of to sound like vocal music. It almost gives it a text, whereas the German harpsichord kind of marries a bit of each of those two sides. It has sustain, it has body to the sound, but you can still pick out the words, if you will, even though it's just instrumental music.
So it's sort of designed to play these busy lines, isn't it? So that you have one melody going on in your left hand, one melody going on in your right hand, and your harpsichord is designed, yours and Bach's harpsichord.
Bach's. Well, that's the thing. So Bach, he was sent on this errand to go pick out this harpsichord, and he picked out a double manual, 2 keyboards, so 2 stacked keyboards, the biggest harpsichord they get. This is a king of instruments as far as the harpsichord goes, and he gets to bring it back to the Prince of Cotton and play on this instrument, I assume himself, quite a bit. Now, this instrument survives to this day. We know what Mietke's instruments were like, and makers today rebuild and reconstruct these instruments and build them from scratch according to Mietke's exact sort of specifications. And I had an opportunity to go and tour and meet a few harpsichord makers a few years back, and stopped in the shop of Bruce Kennedy, who lives in Tuscany, because, you know,
Who doesn't want to go to pick out a harpsichord in Tuscany?
Exactly. And so tried his instrument, and I just fell in love with his Mietke double. So he makes copies of the Mietke and decorates them exactly as you would have seen Bach's instrument decorated.
Wow.
And it just truly something special about Bach's music immediately came to the fore when I sat down and started playing Bach, and I was like, if I could ever find a way. And then last spring, I had a patron come forward and decide to help me acquire my own Mietke double. So I own now
So it's like you're playing on Bach's harpsichord at home.
I know, truly. So the best errand you could ever have is to go meet your maker.
So why don't we now just wander over here to the harpsichord, and we'll get you to play play a little music for us.
Absolutely.
So Chris, can you take us through a little bit this first movement of Brandenburg 5? Because as you were saying before, the role of the harpsichord kind of changes. This is kind of one of those like watershed moments in harpsichord playing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's almost tough to tell in this piece whether it's by accident or by design that it becomes the first harpsichord concerto ever in existence. You know, traditionally the harpsichord's role in a concerto like this would be accompaniment. It would be to play the bass line along with the cellists in something we call basso continuo. So I'm going to sort of demonstrate in this piece how Bach kind of lets the harpsichord emerge for the first time ever as the solo featured instrument in a piece like this, and how kind of special it is in setting up then all of the harpsichord and piano concertos that would follow. So
what do you play at the beginning?
What do I play at the beginning?
Yeah.
I play the bass line, essentially. I join the cellos and the bass, and I play. So to that, Bach furnishes a few little numbers. It's kind of like a little lead sheet, kind of like a little jazz thing. So I add some chords over top of that provide rhythmic and sort of some harmonic context to what's going on. So me in a typical concerto would be just playing. Something like that, just to add rhythm, and of course all the strings are playing the primary theme at that point. And so you don't actually hear that the harpsichord is kind of emerging from that texture until after this opening sort of 8 measures is complete, and that's for the first time you hear the harpsichord do this. And so I'll play the end of the ritornelle.
So you really start playing melodic material. You're playing a line that I would normally play.
Absolutely.
Or the flute player would normally play.
And it's not improvised, it's actually written out. Like Bach writes out all those little tiny notes. And certainly then I step outside of the normal accompaniment role from that kind of measure 9 of the piece, and then I never really go back into the background. It just ramps up more and more as you go.
And you've got a kind of cool part. Can you play us some of the cool parts coming up?
Well,
because you kind of go crazy.
I kind of go crazy. Yeah, I think I used the word shred earlier.
Yes.
Well, what happens is, we're going along merrily, and then about sort of 2/3 of the way through the piece, I just start going crazy all by myself. Everyone else is just having a lovely time, and I get to the end of a phrase. Where does that
I
come from?
don't know. So all of a sudden, it's almost like it's Bach being like, and
Yes,
whatcha,
exactly.
the harpsichord.
So that's all going on in the background while everybody else is just kind of playing little happy music along
Then
with
we
it.
become the accompaniment figures for you.
Exactly. And really, that's all just a prelude. So that's not
big
the end of
moment.
what Bach has in store. So it's at the point where we get to the end, we come to a sort of question mark harmony. We get, and everyone stops. And what happens? Bach then writes 2.5 minutes of the most sort of intense harpsichord writing of just using every theme that's come to this point in some manner, in 3 parts, kind of doing it all on the harpsichord, and then just devolving or evolving into just straight fast notes for a good 1.5 minutes. It's the only piece where I think I've had the joy of being almost like a jazz musician with the solo, where they applaud in the middle of the piece. I've played this piece in concert, and the audience has actually applauded
after
at the end
that
of this solo
yeah.
in the middle of the movement.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a little taste of it. I'll play the very beginning and then something from where it goes a little mad.
Okay.
So here's the beginning. Here's how he just brings the themes in. You hear some of that material that I introduced myself into the piece with. It's still very relatively calm. There's a lot of notes going. Civilized. But then what happens a little bit later? So we get...
That part.
Yeah, and it just goes from there, and then slowly brings back the orchestra for one final run of the main theme, and that's how he ends this wild first movement.
Amazing. And we can't wait to hear you play the whole thing. So the last of the Brandenburg concertos in the collection, number 6, has a very unusual instrumentation as well. And I'm trying to think of other pieces that have this instrumentation. But what's so unusual about this one is that it's for the mid to low range of the orchestra, right? There's no high,
violins.
no squeaky violins. There's no high-pitched flutes or trumpets or oboes or any of the high instruments in the orchestra. It's violas who are the middle of the orchestra and usually are kind of the fillers of the orchestra, suddenly are thrust into this solo limelight. And then we have the lower voices. And we also have 2 special instruments that got added, which we think maybe were added for the prince, right? He played viola da gamba, violin, and harpsichord, of course, because he ordered the good harpsichord. Yeah. And we know that unusually, sometimes he played with the musicians. And I think that was something that's not really done a whole lot in the world of court,
How do you point out a wrong note to your prince?
I know. I mean, some did. Like Frederick the Great also was another one that played with the musicians, right? But it can be
extra delicate with your
you have to be delicate
rehearsal,
with them.
rehearsal protocol.
So and because of this, I think the gamba parts, which just in case anybody doesn't know, the viola da gamba is like a cello. It looks sort of like a cello. But it has more strings than a cello, and it has frets, which are the kind of stripes on the top of the instrument, like a guitar. And it was really popular, especially in France, in the Baroque times in the 18th centuries. And so these gamba parts are, I guess, what we would call easy. They're not the solo parts. They're not the most difficult parts, but it's something that somebody who is, maybe a good amateur musician could easily come and sit in with the orchestra and have a great time, and also can feel that they're featured in a certain way, because there's not all these really virtuosic violins and flutes and trumpets and stuff taking away the limelight, in a certain way. And it has there's something that's slightly more chill about about the quality of the sound, I think, in these low instruments.
I think you hit on something. The how fun it is to be in the ensemble playing all of these pieces, no matter where you're seated, no matter what part you're on. I think Bach really captured that. And so whatever instrument you take up, if you're involved in the Brandenburg, any of the six, you feel pride and you feel just true joy playing this music.
Yeah.
So.
It is really one of the kind of most striking features of rehearsing and performing this music. You feel the joy that Bach had for writing the music, and for this kind of discovery of all these new combinations of voices and instruments and conversations between these instruments, and also just the pure fun of playing together and communicating with your colleagues and your fellow musicians.
We all want.
Well, thank you. Exactly. It's what we all want. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for joining us for our conversation about Brandenburg concertos. And we look forward to seeing you at the concerts.